Hey everybody, Jim here with another video for you. This is a tribute to my late brother Greg. Some of the movies that we saw together and some of the movies that he introduced me to. But before we begin, at the end of this video, if you like what you see, please consider giving me a thumbs up, a possible subscribe. Most importantly, leave comments below. Let me know how you feel about these movies and how you feel about the video in general. Now, I mentioned on my page recently that my brother had passed away back in March. His birthday was a couple of days ago. He would have been 63 this year. He was 6 years older than I. And we shared a lot of interests, but one of the biggest ones, was movies. So this little video right here is some of the movies that we saw together and some of the movies that he made me aware of and that I saw on my own. But I just wanted to throw this together just to give you an idea, movie-wise, about who my brother Greg was. So the first one on our list is something that we saw together. As a family, actually, but he sat with me on this one. From my Mel Brooks collection, Young Frankenstein from 1974. We saw this actually in 1975, very early in 1975. I was about 7.5 years old. As I said, we went as a family. Nobody wanted to sit with the little brother, except for Greg. He was 13 at the time, going on 13 at the time. So we kind of sat by ourselves, apart from the rest of the brood, so to speak. And I love this movie. It became both my gateway to Mel Brooks and to horror movies. Greg, being 13 at that point, had already known about, horror movies, and he loved them, and he saw how excited I was about horror movies and such. So, and with my also seeming to enjoy Mel Brooks' goofy sense of humor. So he kind of exploited those two things. And in relative short order, he introduced me to a TV show called Monty Python's Flying Circus. And around that time, they had a theatrical film called Monty Python and the Holy Grail. Now, I did not see this theatrically. I did not see this until it came out on video in the early 80s. We're talking like 1980 or so. But he got me involved with the show because they used to play the show on public access TV on Sunday evenings. And he loved it and got me into it. And yeah, Holy Grail is one of my favorite movies. Life of Brian is definitely one of my favorite comedies of all time. But Greg was the first one who ever introduced me to Monty Python. And then right around that same time, my parents left him in charge of me to go babysitting while they went out. And this was a real late night. I was supposed to be in bed by 10 o'clock. And this was on George Romero's classic, Night of the Living Dead. It was on late night creature feature TV. And he allowed me to stay up under the condition that I would not tell mom and dad about it because, well, you all know, he would have gotten his ass kicked. This movie terrified me, gave me nightmares for weeks, but I never did tell my parents about it until years later, of course. And it's one of my favorite movies of all time. And again, first time I saw it was with my brother Greg. Then around this time, now we're talking like 1976 or so, Greg was having some problems at home and asked my parents if he could join the Navy. They begrudgingly allowed him to because, again, he was having a lot of troubles. He had dropped out of school at this point and such, and they figured it would help him get his life on track. So even though he was only 16, they signed the paperwork and off he went. And I didn't see him again for about another year or so. But while he was out in California, that's where he was stationed. He was stationed to the USS Kitty Hawk. He'd call home every once in a while, and he was telling me about this movie that was just starting to come out in limited release in California where he was. And it was called Star Wars. Being 10 years, not even 10 years old at this point, when I heard the title, Star Wars, I had no idea what that even meant. I thought it meant like celebrities at war with one another, to be honest. But he assured me it was going to be the coolest thing I had ever seen. And when it finally came out about 3 months later in the Midwest, I agreed. Star Wars changed my life. But the first time I ever heard about it was from my brother Greg. Then he came home for a visit, and it was around 1980 or so. And he gave me a copy of a magazine called Fangoria, which is a horror movie magazine. And on that cover was the movie Scanners. And the shot was the money shot from the movie with the guy's head exploding. And I saw that image and was immediately intrigued. But unfortunately, it didn't come out in America until the following year. But I had that image in my head. Didn't know what it was in context of that movie, but it burned in my brain for a year before me and my sister went and saw this movie theatrically. And no pun intended, it blew our minds. But again, I never would have even heard of this movie if it wasn't for my brother Greg giving me that Fangoria magazine. And we did go to the movies while he was there, and the one that we went and saw that I can remember was Battle Beyond the Stars, the Roger Corman Magnificent Seven ripoff set in space, written by John Sayles and directed by Jimmy Murkakami. I have no idea. James Cameron actually worked on this movie visually, some of the visual effects. And again, this movie is a blatant ripoff of the Magnificent Seven, which in effect is a blatant ripoff of the Seven Samurai, but it doesn't matter. I love this cheeseball movie. It's great. And about that time, he did come home for good for a while, and he was out of the Navy at this point, and cable TV was just starting to become a thing. And he started showing me some movies that he loved when he was younger, that he got to see theatrically that I had never seen. We'll start off with The Day of the Dolphin. This was definitely one of his favorite movies when we were kids. From 1973, starring George C. Scott. It's a weird science fiction conspiracy thriller, but it's really good. And George C. Scott gives a great performance. And he definitely told me about this one before I saw it on cable. Death Race 2000, another Roger Corman classic. This one's directed by Paul Bartel. And I love this movie. I have always loved this movie. I will always love this movie. People really enjoyed the Jason Statham quote-unquote remake from Paul Anderson. It doesn't hold a candle to this. I love this movie. And then he introduced me to this one, Westworld. Directed by Michael Crichton and starring Richard Benjamin, James Brolin, and the incredible Yul Brynner. This movie was like the original Terminator and the original Jurassic Park before either of those movies were even thought of. And, of course, Michael Crichton wrote the novel that Jurassic Park, so makes sense. But Yul Brynner basically plays the evil robot version of his character from the Magnificent Seven, and this movie's glorious. I love it. And then he introduced me to a couple of my favorite movies of all time. First, Slapshot, directed by George Roy Hill and starring Paul Newman and Strother Martin. This is my Shout Factory Steelbook. Greg loved this movie, and so do I. It's one of the funniest movies ever. It's my favorite sports comedy ever. I just absolutely adore Slapshot. He also introduced me to this, The Boys in Company C, with Stan Shaw, Andrew Stevens, and Arlie Ermey, among others, directed by Sidney J. Fury. This movie came out in '78. And this movie is literally Full Metal Jacket, a decade before Full Metal Jacket. I absolutely adore this movie. And again, I never would have heard of it if it wasn't for my brother Greg. And he also rented this for me because this movie you had to be 18 to rent at the video store by my house when this first came out. George Romero's Dawn of the Dead. The greatest horror movie of all time, in my opinion. And it would make sense that Greg introduced me to the original classic. Why wouldn't he introduce me to its sequel? Love it. Unfortunately, we did not see Day of the Dead together. Eventually we did when it came out on videotape, but I saw that one theatrically on my own. And around the time that I was going crazy about Kurt Russell and Escape from New York, he kept telling me about used cars and said, hey, when this comes out on cable, watch it. And I did. And I love it. And I still love it. And I think it's one of Kurt Russell's best roles. Jack Warden, rest in peace, plays 2 roles in this movie. And Garrett Graham gives a performance of the ages. I absolutely love this movie. Okay, the rest of these we saw theatrically together. We're going to start off in 85 with Remo Williams, The Adventure Begins, starring Fred Ward and Wilford Brimley. And again, absolutely love this movie. This movie basically gets a lot of shit because of Joel Grey playing an Asian man, a Korean man to be exact, in makeup. And people accuse this movie of being racist now. Most of those people have never even seen the damn movie. Joel Grey is brilliant in this movie, and I love it. This one we didn't see theatrically, but there's a tie-in here. In 1990, me and my brother actually went to a lot of movies together in the early 90s, and video was definitely a big thing at that time. So I went over to his place one day in 1990, and sorry kids, drug alert, got seriously stoned. And he said, hey, I rented this crazy movie with this crazy cover. You got to watch it. Brain Dead with Bill Pullman and Bill Paxton. And that is the cover from that original videotape. Again, this is from the Corman Factory. This is not a horror movie per se. But my God, is it entertaining. And even if you're stone cold sober, you're going to have a hard time following it because the plot in this movie doubles in on itself about 10 times. It's like origami. I love this movie. But we did. We had to pause and rewind and go back and forth at least 10 times because we were too baked to comprehend what we were watching. I love Brain Dead. But as soon as that one was over, we decided to smoke another big fatty and go to the show to see the movie that had just come out that week. And it was Total Recall with Arnold Schwarzenegger, Michael Ironside, and Ronnie Cox, among many others. Sharon Stone, Rachel Ticotin. Paul Verhoeven's follow-up to his other sci-fi classic, RoboCop. And again, no pun intended, our minds were completely blown with the special effects and the plot. And oh my God, I love this movie. And I will always love this movie. And I've seen this movie probably 100 times, but every time I watch it, I think about my brother Greg. Love it. Saw this one theatrically too. And we're going to end with 3. And there's a little bit of a theme here. We're going to start off with, from my Predator trilogy, the second installment, Predator 2. Starring Danny Glover and Crazy Gary Busey. Now, people that have been following my channel for a while, especially if you go back to the early days of the 50 years of film, the late 80s and early 90s, you'll notice that every time that I have a movie with Crazy Gary Busey in it, I say Crazy Gary Busey. There's 2 reasons for that. Number 1, I love the guy. But number 2, that started with my brother. Because this one and the next one coming up, when we saw it, the first thing out of his mouth was, that movie was cool, but Jesus Christ, Gary Busey was crazy as hell in that movie, and it just became a running joke between us. Every time we would see Gary Busey doing his thing, it became Crazy Gary Busey. Love Predator 2. It's not as good as the first one, but it's entertaining as hell. The next one, Under Siege, with Steven Seagal, Tommy Lee Jones, and Crazy Gary Busey again. This one is directed by Andrew Davis. My brother was a huge Steven Seagal fan. He really liked him. I did not. I still don't. But I begrudgingly went to go see this one because it had Tommy Lee Jones and Crazy Gary Busey in it, and I figured, what the hell? And loved it. This is definitely my favorite Steven Seagal movie. It's not even close. And like I said, outside of Executive Decision, which, quite honestly, he's only in that movie for 10 minutes, it's the only Seagal property I own. I know this guy has a lot of fans, and that's cool. You know, I'm not shitting on you or his movies for that matter. It's just not my cup of tea. But Under Siege is immensely entertaining. We're going to end it with this one. Point Break. Starring Patrick Swayze, Keanu Reeves, and come on, everybody, say it with me just once. Crazy Gary Busey. This one is directed by Catherine Bigelow. I didn't necessarily save this one for last for any particular reason. It just happened to come out that way. But we did see this one together. Me, my ex-wife, him, and his ex-wife, believe it or not. How time flies. But let's face it, this movie came out almost, 30 years ago now. But it's a lot of fun. And what a lot of people don't remember is this was actually Keanu Reeves' first full-on dramatic action movie. Okay? He did this movie, 6 years before The Matrix. And definitely a long time before Point Break. The main buzz on this movie was Patrick Swayze, of course, but even then, okay, outside of Ghost, Patrick Swayze at this point wasn't a huge star. His movies weren't huge hits. Even Roadhouse wasn't a big hit. Dirty Dancing was, and that came out after this. But Point Break is a lot of fun. And again, it says right on the title, 100% pure adrenaline, and it is. And even though Crazy Gary Busey's not quite as crazy in this part as he usually is, like in the other two movies, there are little flourishes here and there, like when he's jumping in the pool or when he's telling Keanu to order him 2 meatball sandwiches. 2. Right now. 2. And then reading Hagar the Horrible and laughing like a little child. And that made my brother laugh like a little child because he loved the guy. And I loved my brother. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you did, please consider giving me a thumbs up, if possible, subscribe, and most importantly, leave comments below. Let me know how you feel about these movies. Let me know if you saw any of these movies theatrically. There are a couple other movies that I saw with my brother that I'm going to mention in the next video, which is the third and final installment of Drive-In Memories. Originally, I was going to post that one today, but I am waiting for a package, so that one will be posted either tomorrow or on Monday. But I hope everybody is having a great weekend, and we'll see you on the next one.